Basically, as soon as I built this shop, which was an early quarantine project, it's been too small. Like, as soon as I moved machines in, I was like, this is tiny. It's 12 by 20 feet, which is 240 square feet. Yeah, that's just not a lot of space as soon as you start putting in a table saw, a planer, a bandsaw, a drill press. I've been planning on building a deck back here as soon as I move in. First thing to do is always lay out. Figure out where your piers are going to go. And this thing is 12 by 16, 2 by 6 joists attached to a ledger at the shop, 2 sets of piers that support 2 different beams that are also just doubled up 2 by 6s. I ran a laser from the finished floor height out to the tall side of my yard because I'm on like a real bad slope, and I only have 7 inches from the finished floor height to where the grade is, so I don't really have a ton of room to have like super beefy floor system. I'm usually working alone, mixing concrete, doing that in a wheelbarrow with a hoe. I also tried out using a drill with a paddle, and it works well and it's easy, but it's not super fast. So if you only have 10 bags or something to do, my recommendation is old school. I poured the first pier, leveled it to the shop itself, and then I leveled all the other piers off of that first one. And that method has worked for me in the past. You just have to make sure that first one is where you like it. I get pressure treated lumber from Eastside Lumber here in Austin. Most of the time it's going to be number 1 for the same price you would pay for number 2, and they will drop it onto your truck. Then I actually go to Lowe's to get the decking, because that is like a huge savings for some reason. This is a technique I learned from Larry Hahn, the Very Efficient Carpenter, where you stack all your joists, measure once, cut one deep enough that you score the next one, and then repeat that process. As long as they're all flush at the other end, then they'll all be the same length. You can see how close to the grade these piers are, and there's barely enough room for a 1-inch deck board, a 2 by 6 joist, and then the pier. So I had to dig out a little bit, but the whole thing almost rests on the ground, but it's probably not a good idea to actually set all your lumber on the ground. So you'll see me crown each joist by sighting down the length of the board, figuring out which way any kind of curve is, and that is pretty important for keeping your stuff flat. I also like to use these little palm nailers that are run by an air compressor, and those make driving all these little 10D nails so much easier. And then I like to hand drive the 16Ds because it makes me feel like a real carpenter, but you can also use that palm nailer to drive those in. I just think it's fun. Putting in blocking also super helpful. You will greatly notice how much stiffer a floor is when you actually add in that blocking, so it's worth taking the extra time and spending that extra $10 on another joist. I'm laying all this decking diagonally, and part of the reason for that is the whole structure that I'm trying to build the deck flush to is more than 12 foot wide. It's very slightly over 12 foot. I couldn't just use 12-foot decking run perpendicularly and have it be flush, so I came up with doing this decking diagonally, and it'll actually help me rolling machines on and off because your wheels, they only hit one seam at a time. I've never run decking diagonally, and it's fairly straightforward, but I did get a little confused about the best way to minimize waste. I'm using a Makita track saw that I recently got, which is super helpful. Obviously, you don't need a track saw to build a deck, but I find that most people figure out a way to use every tool they own as often as possible. So it makes it really clean to trim these edges after you run all the decking wildly, just a more efficient way to do that. My method for this was to pin every board in place and then use a chalk line to snap lines so that I could then go back and put in all 600 screws, whatever it was, in every single joist and have them be as straight as possible. It's real labor intensive and it makes your back hurt. I don't really know a better way to do this, but then it looks really nice. You'll see on some decks, like, people will use a framing nailer or a siding nailer to just pop, 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 pop. And that's fast, but it doesn't look very nice when you're all done. And details matter. When you're doing something like putting in 600 screws, it really matters that you do it the most efficient way possible, because it pays dividends and it adds up. The deck has been set perfectly flush to the existing floor. This felt really good. Another little detail, using a router to put a round over on every cut edge on the deck. One little extra step that takes 5 minutes, but that you will notice with your eye. I also like to preload certain things with screws. A good example would be this skirt. It's a lot easier to do that measuring, pre-drilling, and start a bunch of screws when that board is waist high versus when you're bent over trying to install it. This whole thing has to get sanded, not just to get rid of those chalk lines, but also any kind of dirt or other stuff before you seal it. Also not so easy on the back, but you're gonna want to do it. And then definitely blow off all that dust. And then it's time to brush on some exterior water-based poly. This is from Cabot, same people that make this other deck stain I really like. And I'm trying this stuff out for the first time. Rolling it on, even though the gallon did not say I could do that. And most of the time I think you're not gonna figure out a better way to put something on than the manufacturer. But I think it worked. Oh, and one last thing. I just wanted to give a special thank you to Adam Young, one of my mentors. He basically taught me every single thing in this video. So, thanks, Adam. Just trying to pay it forward. Thanks for watching.